¿Qué tal? Pues nada, muy buenas tardes. Bienvenidas a la biblioteca y bienvenidos a la biblioteca del Real Jardín Botánico. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos esta tarde. Era un reto programar el 17 de julio en Madrid hacer una presentación de un libro, porque bueno, la temperatura no suele acompañar, cuesta salir de casa. Lo entiendo perfectamente. Bueno, además luego hoy tenemos ha habido un incendio, ¿no? Cerca, que se nota el ambiente, ¿no? Hay ceniza, ¿no? Se huele a quemado, en fin, que las cosas se ponen un poco en contra, pero les agradezco especialmente su atención y que hayan querido venir hoy a concluir el ciclo, ya por el 9º ciclo. Llevamos 9 años presentando libros, esperamos seguir haciéndolo, pero es verdad que la ocasión yo creo que era extraordinaria, por diferentes motivos, que intentaré apuntar alguno ahora a continuación en esta breve introducción o presentación. Pero bueno, contar con la presencia de David Mabberley yo creo que ya de por sí es algo extraordinario, y el libro también lo es, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues no queríamos perder la ocasión de presentar el libro, de cerrar el ciclo. Hemos presentado diferentes tipos de libros a lo largo del ciclo. Recuerdo los últimos que han tenido que ver pues precisamente con cítricos. Luego voy a cambiar al inglés para que David pueda entender mejor. Un libro que presentamos de Vicente Todolí, una fundación de cítricos que hay en Valencia, muy importante. Y luego hemos presentado algún libro también para niños. En fin, ha sido un ciclo variado. Les invito a que, si les puede haber interesado o les puede interesar, nuestras presentaciones están todas subidas al canal de la biblioteca de YouTube. Allí se pueden consultar perfectamente. Y creo que, si les parece, voy a pasar al inglés. I'm going to speak English. Sorry for that, because my English is so bad. But trying maybe could understand a little bit what I'm trying to explain and this brief introduction. So, first of all, I would like to sincerely thank you, our guest today, for joining us and agreeing to give us this talk about the book Citrus, A World History, published by Thames Hudson. It's a great honor for us. So, in this case, I think this book represents an extraordinary combination of science, botany, and humanities. That's called plant humanities sometimes, including art and history, but also economics, politics, medicine, chemistry. And what also interesting is that it's written by an eminent botanist. On the one hand, it teaches us about citrus fruits from a botanical perspective. In fact, citrus fruits are botanically called as Hesperidium, while on the other hand, Hesperides is a Greek famous myth linked with the famous golden apples. So, by means of this book, you learn about botany and also, for example, in this case, the history, the mythology, the etymology around citrus. In fact, regarding botany, I'm not a botanist, I suggest calling citrus ending with an X or with an cross. Because, yeah, it's like the letter used in mathematics, where something is unknown, and also because the complexity of that genus, and also for the many hybrids within this genus and the difficulty of identifying them. As the author explained, the taxonomic confusion in this genus has only been resolved thanks to modern DNA techniques. So the book does an excellent job clarifying this complex issue. For me, it was so interesting to learn that the lemon and orange are hybrids, while the mandarin is not. So, regarding the book itself, I would say that it's awesome edited or published. The selection of illustrations are so beautiful, coming not only from books but also from paintings. And in my opinion, I think it's one of the best published or edited books I've seen in years. So the book takes us on a historical journey from the earliest archaeobotanical remains to the present day, exploring the origin of the genus citrus and highlighting key milestones in the history of these treasured fruits. As we are drinking a lemonade today, I think it's also fascinating to learn that, or maybe I can say that we can feel like kings. It was once a royal tribute in China by the 10th century and reached Italy in the 14th century and France in the 17th. So, although the book has not been yet translated into Spanish, I highly recommend it. It also has a strong connection with Spain, one of the world's leading orange producers, harvesting nearly 4 million tons annually. I found interesting to learn how, for example, Alfonso V de Aragon, who was also king of Naples, contributed to the establishment of orangeries in Italy and sent also plants to Valencia, but not only plants, also gardeners, which is important as well. So I'm going to stop here. I don't want to keep highlighting more aspects of the book, as there are many. As we are lucky to have the author here as today. Once again, I thank him for joining us, and I will briefly introduce him now. Sorry for that, because he has an extensive curriculum and many published books and articles. So, David Mabberley, he's an emeritus fellow at Wadham College, University of Oxford, adjunct professor at Macquarie University, Sydney, and Professor Emeritus at the University of Leiden. He is the author of the very well-known and consulted Mabberley's Plant Book, a portable dictionary of plants, now in its 4th edition, and co-author of Joseph Banks' Florilegium, Botanical Treasures from Cook's First Voyage, among others. So, thank you so much for being today with us. It's your turn.
Should we move this?
Yeah.
While we're moving this across, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming out on such a hot and smoky day. I appreciate this very much. But also I would like to thank Felix for being my host this week here in the library, because the library you have in the Botanic Garden here in Madrid is one of the very few places where you can do the kind of work that I need to do to revise the book he just talked about, my plant book, which is just there. And so I have spent the time in the stacks in there this week, working along the shelves, and it's a great privilege to be here, so I thank you again for that. So you've heard about the book. Sadly, the stock of books is in the customs, and we hope will be released soon, and so will be available in Madrid soon.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I would like to say that los libros estarán disponibles en la librería Gaudí, que es la librería que se iba a encargar de hacer la venta, pero no han llegado por problemas en la aduana.
Okay, so thank you for all of those things. And I want to pick up some of the lines which Felix has led you to this afternoon. And I want to make, in fact, what the book is about. It's a kind of sandwich. The outside of the sandwich is the science, and the middle of the sandwich is the cultural history, which he alluded to. So I'm not going to have time to talk about everything in the book, obviously, but what I want to do is to try and bring these two things together. First of all, we're talking about some of the basic botany, and then some of the cultural history, and then to talk about the disaster which is about to hit the whole of the citrus industry, and if there's anything we can do about it. And the answer may lie in this, which I hope you will look at later, which is the caviar citrico. You may wonder why now, but I hope by the end you will understand. Now, Felix said that there are 4 million tons of citrus produced in Spain. The last world figures that we have was that the annual production across the world is 160 million tons of citrus. And that greatly exceeds that of, say, apples, which is just 93 million. While bananas is also somewhere in between, about 124. So citrus production is the most important fruit industry in the world. It's also deeply embedded in all sorts of aspects of human life, in religious things, in medicine, in art, and in culture of all kinds. And I want to allude to that. But we have to begin at the beginning. One of the things that Felix said is that the fruit of citrus, how do we make a start? Yeah. Is called a hesperidium. You think of an orange. Right, thank you. This is a picture of a Dutch orangery in the 17th century with a rather grand person showing off how important he is by having these people carry the pots of citrus around. Okay, so here we have the typical sweet orange, which was known as the China orange, or Lisbon orange, or Portuguese orange. This is the sweet orange. And that was introduced relatively late into Europe, not until 15th or even 16th century. And the structure of the fruit, this thing, is unique to citrus. Hesperidium, which is a confusion, as Felix said. The apples of the Hesperides, which were in mythology, they were guarded by some lovely ladies somewhere near Gibraltar, and Hercules had to get these fruits from these ladies. And he called them, these ladies were called the Hesperides, and so the apples of the Hesperides. Now, they were not apples at all, but they were not citrus either. They were probably quinces. The thing was that as soon as these things were introduced with big, bright coloured fruits, people confused things and said, all right, this is the Hesperides. And the Latin name given to the fruit is from this confusion. Now, this structure is unique to citrus, and the outside, the so-called pericarp, the outer wall of the fruit, contains a large number of compounds which are inimical to fungi, bacteria, and insects, which is why you can keep an orange for a very long time without it rotting, because it contains compounds which are antifungal, insecticidal, and so forth. This is very important. Once you get inside the fruit, the bit you eat, in English we call these bits the segments when you open them, but of course it's inside, which is the fleshy bit. Now, you may often have wondered, what is this? Because if you break open the segment, there are all these little finger-like things. Now, if you go back to when the fruit was just beginning in the flower, think of an orange flower, in the middle of the flower is the ovary, which one day will produce seeds. But it's so the unfertilized seeds are called ovules, and they are surrounded by hairs. And what happens, that when the ovules turn into seeds and begin to grow, these hairs begin to expand and expand and expand and expand and get filled with orange juice. So what you're eating is a lot of pumped up hairs. Okay? And inside there are the seeds, keeping nice and moist until it's time to germinate. So this structure then is the Hesperidium. Okay, so where do we begin? Another thing I wanted to point out, if you look at the base of the leaves of an orange, very often there's a little joint. You know, if you look at that, if you can see that, you may wonder what that is. Well, we now believe that it's the equivalent of this. This is a leaf, one big leaf of a thing related to citrus, but from Africa, Citropsis. And so what we think is that this bit, the apical leaflet of this complicated leaf, plus this bit, gives you the equivalent of an orange. All right? So this is the form of leaves which is typical of the family to which citrus belongs, which is the family Rutaceae, which includes ruta, rue, which also has a divided leaf. All right, so we now think that the citrus trees derive from things with leaves like this in the tropics. And this was a long time ago, probably before Gondwana, the great southern continent, before it split up into Africa and India and South America. All right, so this is the first of citruses known to Europeans. This is Citrus medica, or the citron. And you can see it has a very thick outer layer of the fruit, and the edible bit is in the middle here. Now, we don't eat these very much because they are very, very bitter, but the peel is used to crystallize it. A lot are here in Spain to make crystallized fruits. And this thing, though, is very, very important for Jewish people because it figures in one of their major feasts, the Feast of the Tabernacles, and it is one of the sacred things which are waved during this ceremony. It was introduced by the Greeks from the Middle East into Europe. People associate it with Alexander the Great. It probably wasn't him personally, but somebody around the time that he was around brought this thing into the Mediterranean. So the first we knew about citrus fruits was this one, Citrus medica. Nothing to do with medicine. It's named after the Medes, these people who lived in what is now Iran. Medes and Persians, Citrus medica. And it was not, as I say, eaten. So what were they using it for? If you take one of these and you put it in your chest of drawers with all your clothes, moths will not come because they do not like the compounds here, these insecticidal compounds. So it was used initially then to keep insects out. Now, this is rather complicated and for a lay audience, so I'll just go through it briefly. This is a kind of family tree of citruses. There are about 25 different wild species of citrus. Now, Felix has already pointed out there's no such thing as a wild orange or a wild lemon, and I'll come on to what those are in a minute. But there are 25 truly wild ones, and they occur all the way from southern Australia, northwards towards China, westwards to India, and eastwards to New Caledonia and Vanuatu in the Western Pacific. Before I started my research, we did not know that because all these had been misclassified, and nobody knew that there were any citruses in Australia, for instance, and we now know that Australia has more wild species of citrus than any other country has. So this just shows the family tree of how they're related to one another. You can't read it from over there, just to say that there's one big group, which is the Australasian group, and this is the Chinese group. And these are the two major zones of diversity of the genus. Now, this rather odd picture, it looks like a kind of dirigible, a flying orange over this nice German town. This, you see, Aranjo, Portugal. This was always considered to be something that the Portuguese had because they were trading with the Arabs who had traded all the way to China, and they brought this into Europe. Now, one of the very strange things about citruses is that they have a very odd sex life. The seeds will completely reproduce the mother plant. It's in the same way, if you take a cutting and plant it in the ground, it will be the same as the mother plant. In citruses, the seeds will be exactly the same as the mother plant. because they do not undergo a cross-fertilization. This means if you take a pip of a Valencia orange, it will grow into a Valencia orange. If you take a pip of an apple, one of your favourite apples, Golden Delicious perhaps from Australia, if you plant that, it will grow into something quite different, because it always has to cross-pollinate. You know, if you grow apples, you have to have a pollinated tree. In citruses, you don't. They can actually produce a plant exactly like the mother. But of course, this is what growers like. They want everything to be the same. Everybody wants to have the same kind of fruit. They want it to be uniform. We'll see why this is bad eventually. But this is a drawing of a germinating orange seed in a test tube in Holland in 1699. And this is by one of the most important early microscopists of Europe, a man called Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutchman. And he had microscopes and so on, but he was also an experimentalist. And so he got these things, and he noticed that if you germinate the seeds, they do not produce just one seedling, they produce more than one. And this is a phenomenon which was first described in these, and these are exactly the same as one another and the same as the mother plant. It's interesting, he posted this drawing from Amsterdam one Thursday evening, and the Royal Society in London received it on the Friday morning, which I don't think you could do today. All right, now, horror, shock horror. This is how they are all related to one another. This awful mess, because they all can hybridize with one another. All these different species, although they can reproduce asexually, in other words, producing seeds just like the mother plant, they can also cross with one another. So let's just go and start simply, all right? Felix mentioned the mandarin. Okay, the wild mandarin is from China, Citrus reticulata. Has very small. The wild one has very small fruits like this, a very thin peel, and is sweet. The other one, which some of you will know, the pomelo, which is this big, and has very thick peel, rather little flesh. Citrus maxima, because it's big. Okay. Now this one, we think it probably grew originally in Vietnam, but the forests where it grew have probably been completely destroyed by our transatlantic ally during the Vietnam War. And we think that this thick pith meant that it was dispersed by water, whereas these little ones were probably dispersed by birds. So completely different dispersal agents. This one in Vietnam, this one in southern China. Now, because these fruits will last a long time if you pick them, we know this, it means if you can put one in your pocket in Vietnam and get on a boat and go all the way to China, and then you can plant some seeds. And what happens is that these things, which previously never met one another, they're now growing next to one another, and they flower, and then the bees, and you end up with hybrids. So the hybrids between the mandarin from China and the pomelo from Vietnam give us the oranges and grapefruits. And as Felix pointed out, you put a little X in front of the species name to show its hybrid origin. So Citrus maxima crossed with Citrus reticulata gives you Citrus little x aurantium. Now this cross has happened many, many, many times. And the offspring, which are more like the mandarin, are things like tangerines and sweet oranges and clementines, satsumas. Whereas the ones which are more like this are sour oranges for marmalade, Seville oranges, or grapefruits. So this is a whole mess of hybrids between these two species. So the bulk of the world's citrus industry is focused on this. Okay, well, you might say, well, it's not just oranges, other things. And so we have to bring in the citron. Remember that? We had that just now. This is a picture from a wonderful thing, a thing called a paper museum put together by Italian people in the 17th century. It now belongs to the King of Australia, who lives in London. And this gets involved with this mess and gives us the lemon. So the lemon, then, what you've just been having here, is a cross between the citron and this mess here. So lemons have 3 parents, okay? A pomelo, a mandarin, and a citron. And dependent upon how sweet that is, you can have sweet lemons, or you can have very, very sour lemons, or you can have bergamot. Now, bergamot you may know from Earl Grey tea, from eau de cologne, and so forth. That is part of this complex. So citrus little x hybrids, citrus little x limon is the lemons, including the bergamots and the sweet lemons and so forth. So they all have 3 parents. The oranges and grapefruits have only 2. All right, now some of you may know this from cooking, if any of you has Thai food from Thailand. You see this funny thing where this part of the leaf is very big. It looks like 2 leaves stuck together. This is Citrus hystrix. And this comes from Malaysia. So we have this one, you remember Citrus medica, which was introduced from India by the Greeks. This one from Vietnam, this one from China. This one is now from places like Borneo and Sulawesi. Again, geographically separated, but once people brought them together, then you get the story. Every time you move these things together, you get these hybrids formed. So what do you think we get when we bring this one into this mess? Well, lime. So the lime then is a cross between this tropical Asian Citrus hystrix, the lime leaves, the Thai food one, and the citron. Okay, so it has 2 different parents. And so you put little x, Citrus aurantiifolia, that is the name for the lime. So we have limes, lemons, and oranges, all hybrids, as Felix was pointing out. Now, one of the problems with the lime, if any of you have had key lime pie, or if you have a gin and tonic with a lime in it, one of the things you don't want are the seeds. The trouble is that all of these produce seeds. So what has happened is that there has been yet another hybridization between this one, the true lime, and the lemons, and the offspring, unusually, has no pips at all. And I'll come to that one in a minute. And in here, it then is a cross which involves the 4 different species. So the seedless lime in gin and tonic has 4 parents. Okay, this was just to show you the Citrus hystrix. This is in Sri Lanka, in a Hindu festival, where people are using these, and they actually act as painkillers. And we must remember that a great deal of the importance of citrus fruits is not just edible, but also medicinal. One of the problems for Spanish Navy in the Middle Ages and afterwards was scurvy, a disease which, due to lack of vitamin C. And it was only with the introduction of citruses into Europe that this began to abate. And particularly the British Navy was very successful in using this, which is why Americans always refer to British people as limeys, because they were using lime juice. But in fact, lemon juice is better. So here is the one which has no pips. Okay, so that's the so-called Tahitian lime. So you can see that it has 1, 2, 3, 4 different parents, and it has no seeds. And the reason why it has no seeds is because it has a funny number of chromosomes. It's what's called triploid. It's got 3 sets of chromosomes and therefore fails to produce any seeds at all. So when you're next having a gin and tonic and you look at that, you will remember, ah yes, triploid. 4 parents, yes. Okay, now some of you may know the kumquat. This is the citrus where you eat the peel as well. You know this little one? This is another one from China, despite the fact it's called japonica. Many plants with the name japonica, like Camellia japonica, were described by Europeans from gardens in Japan, but they in fact were Chinese plants that the Japanese were growing. So citrus japonica is also from southern China, and you may wonder, well, perhaps it's got involved in this, and lo and behold, it has. So a cross between the kumquat and the mandarin is what's called a calamondin. Now you sometimes see these in the winter here in Europe as grown as an ornamental little tree with little perfectly round fruits. This is the calamondin. But if you go to the Philippines, it's called calamansi, and it is the soft drink. So in the way we were just having lemon juice lemonade there, they would have calamansi in bottles. So this is a cross between this Chinese one, this is from central China, and this one which is from southern China. And we can go on. Any of you ever heard of Rangpur? Rangpur lime? You don't drink gin? No? They're now flavouring gin with Rangpur. R-A-N-G-P-U-R, Rangpur. It's the name of a place in India. This is a cross between the mandarin and the citron, so-called rough lemon or Rangpur lime. Okay? Now you'll notice that the mandarin is central to almost all of these things. And I'll come back to that and why that's important in a minute. And we can go on further. Here's another one which has leaves a bit like the lime leaves, like the one from Thailand, but this one is from southwest China, the so-called Ichang papada, and it gets crossed into something which you also might know as very trendy, the yuzu. You know, if you go into a restaurant, they're always drizzling yuzu all over everything. Well, that is a cross, again, between the mandarin and this one. We see we're filling in the chart slowly, at that rather horrifying chart we had at the start. Then there's one down here, which has, some of you at the front will see, Citrus trifoliata. It has 3 leaflets, not just one. And this one is often used as a root stock. In other words, you grow the seeds, and then you cut the top off, and then you stick an orange or a mandarin or a lime or something on the top. It's called a root stock. So if, for instance, you're growing one of those, you may get suckers coming up, which have 3 leaflets, and that's this thing. Okay, well, this is from northern China. And, of course, it's been crossed with oranges, or this lot, produce a thing called the citronge, which is the most used rootstock in the United States these days. And it's a cross between this one and this mess here of oranges. And we can go on. There's the thing called the lime quat and the citronge quat and the orange quat involving these things. And then, importantly, as we will see as we go along, the Australian species. So Citrus australasica, which is what this is, the finger lime, which my daughter managed to find here in Madrid, is grown in the Levante part of Spain, but these have come from Morocco. And this is what is called the caviar citronico. And it can cross with the calamondin. It can also cross with certain other Australian species. And I'll hope to show you why that is important in a minute. Okay, that's the first part. That's the science first part. So you can all calm down now. I want to talk a little bit now, as I said, about the cultural history of these things. So this is a very famous painting by Chagall showing the ceremony I was talking about, the Jewish ceremony of the Feast of the Tabernacles. And here is this man, and he's got the 3 sacred things which you have to wave during the ceremony, and it includes the citron. And they have special silver boxes to keep the citrons inside. And each citron has to be perfect. You mustn't have any blemishes. It must still have its stalk. Preferably it's still got the stigma at the far end, and so on. So it's very, very important for Jewish people to have one of these things. And it's a sort of status thing to have the most perfect. And people are paying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of euros for a good one. This is a form of the citron which you may have seen as an ornamental here in Spain. This is called the Buddha's hand, and they've now got forms which you can grow in a pot this big with these funny things. This is a mutant form where the carpels, that is to say the bits containing the seeds, remain separate, and so that each one of those contains the remnants of what would become the seeds. And this mutant form is very much like one which can be caused by infection by insects. So this is a freaky thing which was selected in China, and here is an example of a figure of one of these citrons made from jade. This is in the National Museum in Taipei, of course taken from Beijing in 1949. And whilst we're in the East, the Japanese people are very, very concerned about citruses. There is a thing called the tachibana, which is a citrus which only known from Japan. And when I went there, there was a great deal of going to see this tree. And they were very, very proud of it. So this is the citrus flower. And this is the Order of Cultural Merit for Japan. It's one of the highest awards, and it has a citrus. Since we've done our work, unfortunately, we had to break the news to the Japanese that Citrus tachibana is not a wild species at all. It's another of these hybrids. And what's worse for Japanese people is that the parental species are from China. Now, what about Europe? The Romans had mosaics with these things. I haven't got time to go on with that, about that. And but by the time we get to the Renaissance, the Medici adopt citrus, and it is thought by some that this coat of arms, which is the one of Clement VII, who was a Medici, when he was Pope, 1523 to 1534, that he adopted citruses for his coat of arms. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether that is the case or not, but anyway, there are these spherical orange things in their coat of arms from the early 16th century. And indeed, we find the period we're talking about, this rather scraggly looking thing here, in fact, is a sour orange in this wonderful picture, which is in Milan. And perhaps one of the most famous pictures in all the world, Primavera by Botticelli. Most people are spending all their time looking at the nice ladies, but if you look up, you can see that they're all citruses, and this little puto is busy charging around. This is a citrus grove. And the Medici family perhaps was a sign of them, or was indicative of the fact that they were some of the few people who were able to grow them. So it was a status symbol. This was very, very significant. Look at these people looking up and saying, my word, what fine oranges, and so on. And then another of the most famous pictures in the world, of course, this is from the Flemish tradition, from Van Eyck. This is the Arnolfini portrait, and people are often very concerned because it was thought to be a wedding portrait, and it's rather unfortunate, this lady on the right, in view of that. But we now think that in fact it is a memorial to her because she died in childbirth. But as far as we're concerned, we're not looking at them, we're looking over here. Because here are oranges. And the significance of this, that here in the north of Europe, to have citruses on the windowsill as well as on this little cabinet, indicated that these people were extremely rich. Because you couldn't afford to have an orangery and grow these things unless you had plenty of money. So in lots and lots of pictures of still lifes and other things from the Flemish tradition, Dutch still life, citruses. And indeed, as far as the Dutch is concerned, the royal house, this is William of Orange. This is in a stained glass window in Gouda in the Netherlands. And this is he. And of course everybody thinks of the House of Orange and the colour orange. This is all a joke, because William of Orange came from Orange in the south of France. So the family is Orange Nassau. And when he was trying to get the Spanish out of the Netherlands, he needed a colour for his standards. And so at that time, the colour orange that name had only just been coined for anything which was the colour of an orange fruit. So you have first the plant, which is the name is from the Sanskrit, naranj, and then it comes through all different European languages, and you get the colour orange. The town of Orange in France is nothing to do with citrus groves, nothing to do with growing oranges at all. The name Orange is from Arasio, which is the name of a water god, a Celtic water god, nothing to do with these. So it was a kind of pun, a joke, that he adopted the colour orange because orange and orange sounded the same. And from that we have the royal house of the Netherlands. And now if you're in Holland, everything is orange, everywhere you go. And from that, of course, when the Dutch royal family took over the British monarchy with William III of England, we got the unfortunate things that then happened in Ireland, and the Orange Men and the Orange Order, and all of that goes back to this kind of joke that he had with the name of his family and the orange fruit. But orangeries were big business, and this was the great status thing. In the Netherlands, as a kind of patriotic thing, you grew as many different kinds as you could. And of course, the biggest and best was in France. And so this is the orangery at this building here, is the orangery at Versailles, which is the biggest ever constructed. And in the summer they would bring the orange, you can see them out here, would bring them out. And Louis XIV, he wasn't so interested in the fruits, he was interested in the flowers. He wanted to have orange blossoms in all his apartments. We have to remember how smelly these people were, and they needed these nice flowers in their apartments. But of course, as you know, here in Europe, these things flower over winter, and then they fruit in the spring. So what do you do in the hottest time of the year when you want lots of this? Well, his gardeners worked it out. If you take an orange tree any time of year and starve it of water, and it begins to drop its leaves and looks as though it's going to die, you give it some water, and a few weeks later it flowers. So if you do that at different times through the year, you will have orange blossom through the year. And so Louis XIV's gardeners worked this out, and so he was able to have his orange blossom all the year round. Anyway, that was the biggest. This is one in Weimar in Germany, and this was important because this is in the Botanic Garden there, which was studied by Goethe. And Goethe is a key figure in the history of botany, And so this orangery is more or less just as he had it in the 18th century. All right, well, then you take these things overseas. Of course, the Dutch people, they went and founded their settlements in America, New Amsterdam. And so the flags of New York still have this orange-red colour commemorating this sort of pun, this joke, this confusion. And you have various places near New York. There are 3 areas called the Oranges, nothing to do with orange fruits, but named after the Dutch royal family. Before, of course, the Dutch traded Manhattan for an island in the Dutch East Indies. And then, bringing up to date, one or two nodding off perhaps, I'll try and keep you awake with this rather racy poster. This is from an orange box. In the 20th century, oranges in the United States were shipped in wooden crates. Today it's in cardboard boxes. And on the end of the crate, they had these labels. And there was a whole genre of commercial art involved with these orange boxes. And they're very collectible these days because they don't make them anymore. So right the way through from high Renaissance pictures through to orange boxes. Now here's a key figure as far as the American scene is concerned. You can't read it, but it says Walter T. Swingle, Special Agent. He was appointed in 1891 by what's left of the US Department of Agriculture. And he was getting concerned that in America, you remember I told you that the oranges reproduce themselves by themselves. They are effectively a clone. So they're genetically identical. And he realized this was not a good idea because as soon as one of them gets a disease, they'll all get the disease. And we must remember that in the 19th century, there'd been the terrible thing, the Irish potato famine. You remember it was exactly the same thing. People had the same clone of potatoes. And this meant mass migration of Irish people, particularly to America. So it was very much on people's mind that this could be very dangerous. So he had a lot of expeditions to countries in Asia to collect what we would now call germplasm. In other words, other different kinds of citruses in cultivation. He did not have the privilege of knowing what we know now, that there's no such thing as a wild orange or a wild lemon and so on. He just went and got oranges and lemons from all these places. But he was on to the right idea. You need to diversify the genetics. Well, I just thought I'd put in one or two fun pictures to keep you going. So in terms of modern art, this is by Salvador Dali, and this is one of his erotica here. And this is from a mutilated book. You should close your eyes as a librarian. From 1846, a French book on fruits, and Dali has adopted it in this rather horrible way. And then there's one of the most famous modern pieces by Philip Stark. I don't know whether it's a familiar name to you, but this lemon squeezer, which is a very famous sort of icon of modern design. And the reason why it's like that is because he did the design of it on the back of a napkin, having eaten just some squid. And he wanted some lemon, and so he then designed this thing. But it was considered impractical by critics. If you ever try this, it goes all over the shop. Stark is reported to have said of it, it's not meant to squeeze lemons, it is meant to start conversations. And then Joseph Beuys, this very famous, he was a sort of environmental artist, this idea that lemon would actually, because you can make a battery using a lemon, and so he has fixed this up to an orange-coloured light bulb. All right. Now is the bad news, and so let's go back to the science now, all right? And this, I've already warned you about the genetic uniformity problem. Okay. Now you can't read this, I'm going to read it out. This is from a website, 13 years ago. And I would be very interested to know how many of you in this room know this story yet. But I'll read it out. Citrus greening disease, also known as Huanglongbing, is one of the most severe plant diseases in the world. It can affect any variety of citrus trees. Once a tree is infected with the disease, there is no known cure. Although the disease is not harmful to humans, fruits from infected trees are not suitable for consumption because of their green colour, misshapen appearance, and bitter taste. The disease has devastated millions of citrus trees in the United States. 13 years ago. The industry has been trying to keep this quiet. They don't want you to know that it's on the way out. So, we need to spend a few minutes looking at what this disease is because it's so important. It's a bacterial disease which is distributed by a vector, an insect. The bacterium can multiply inside the insect. This insect is just a couple of millimeters long. It's called a psyllid. And this thing attacks the young shoots of citrus trees. And it has, like so many of these insects, it has a kind of pump mechanism. So it puts its proboscis inside, the plant sucks out the juice, and then at the same time the contents of its stomach go into the plant. So whilst it's feeding, it's injecting bacteria into the citrus. And I've got some numbers about how many it does. Yes. Infection can follow in as little as 15 minutes feeding time, and 100% infection can take place after as little of an hour feeding by this insect. The disease is spread not only by the psyllids, but by grafting. In other words, if you take a shoot which has been infected and graft it on to a rootstock somewhere, you will spread the disease. Now, until tree, because I need to explain something, it's injected into what's called the phloem, which is the living part under the bark of a tree. And that's the bit which takes the food from the leaves, where it's been made, to the roots. And if you want to kill a tree, you have to ring bark it, you have to cut right the way around. And so what you do is you cut through this living tissue under the bark. Now, if you don't cut it completely, if you're trying to kill a tree by ring bark, unless you cut it completely, the tree, very clever, it redirects all the food through the remaining bits that you haven't cut. So it's the same with this. Until the last of these pipes is full of bacteria, the tree will look fine. And then suddenly, that's it. And it goes bright yellow and dies. And that's why it's called Huanglongbing, which is a Chinese word meaning yellow dragon disease. It's this terrible yellow thing. So this can take up to 3 or 4 years. So while the tree is looking fine, it's acting as a source of infection for other trees. All right. Now the insect, this thing, is called the Asian citrus psyllid, and it probably originated in India. The disease, although it's got a Chinese name, certainly did not start in China, because none of the native citruses in China are resistant to it. So it's a new thing for the crop. So where did it come from? We now think that it came from Africa, and that what happened was that people bringing citruses around into Africa, the insect with the disease moved onto the citruses. Now, one of the things that the psyllid likes to do, if you have an orange and the bit where the stalk used to be, that little depression, they like to sit in there. So if you've got one of these and you put it in your pocket and you get on an airplane and go somewhere, you can introduce this thing. So quarantine is very important. Now, this disease is so serious that, let me get you some figures. It was first recorded in China in 1934, but by then it had been recorded in almost all of Asia. So it didn't come from China, as I said. It was in the Americas, the insect was in the Americas in the 1900s and got to Africa by the 2010s. The spread of the bacteria means that the most severe form of the disease now occurs in not only the Americas, but throughout much of subtropical and tropical Asia, east to New Guinea, and west to the islands of the Indian Ocean, and now Africa. The insect is now in the most isolated archipelago in the world, Hawaii. The severe forms prevented the establishment of a modern citrus industry in Asia, and by September 2004, the insect was found in Brazil and is now rampant in South and Central America. The insect was found in Florida in 1998. The psyllid and the disease soon reached Louisiana, then Texas, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Alabama. In August 2008, the insect was found in San Diego, California, perhaps coming from Mexico. Today it is found throughout the citrus-growing parts of Florida, where it has spread to affect 80%, it's probably now more like 90%, of the orange groves. It's put paid, in effect, to the Florida citrus industry, which was worth $9 billion per annum. Today, nowhere in the world is there an effective management regime in terms of treatment of infected plants. In the United States, the situation is dire, though only in very recent years has the industry admitted it to be a major problem. In 2004, when I started my work on this aspect of citrus, there were 7,000 citrus growers in Florida. By 2023, there were fewer than 2,000, and now I think it's just a couple of hundred. So that means if you go to the United States and you have to have your OJ, you know, all Americans want orange juice for breakfast, it's not coming from the United States, it's coming from Brazil. Now, as it stands, there is no known cure, as I've said. The only thing you can do is to harvest before it gets doing this, before it gets fruits like this. So you're having to replace the trees every 2 or 3 years. This is very expensive. If you have to grub out a whole citrus grove and then plant, it's just not worth it. So that's why people are giving up. Now you might be thinking, well, what about Spain? One of the very interesting things about this, it's in New Guinea, but it's not in Australia. It's in tropical Africa, but it's not in the Mediterranean. Why? We do not know why. But it means that in the future, the citrus-growing regions of the Mediterranean and Australia will be at a competitive advantage with the rest of the world. So Egypt, for instance, is now one of the major exporters of citrus fruit. You wouldn't have thought so, but it is. Recently I was in Israel, in fact just before the atrocities took place. They always had Jaffa oranges from Israel. They are now saying, no, agriculture is old science. We don't want that because we want to be one of the technological hubs of the Mediterranean. We want to be like Singapore. So I said to them, well, what about food security if you don't want agriculture? It's not as though you're surrounded by countries who are very friendly, who will give you lots of food. They have no answer to that. But anyway, why is it that the Mediterranean and Australia are okay so far? We think that there must be something about the climate which this insect does not like, yet. But you only need a few mutants of this to come along, then it's all finished, all right? So far, so good. But in the long term, we need to breed resistance into citruses. Now this, of course, means, use a terrible expression, genetic engineering. Now, in Europe in particular, of course, people are very concerned about this, and rightly so. But in the end, if you want orange juice, you're going to have genetic engineering. Have one or the other. Where are we going to get these genes from for resistance? Well, it's these boys. The Australasian group. Remember, there's the Asian group and then the Australasian group. And it seems that many of the Australasian ones are resistant. So here is one, Australian postage stamp. This is one which is not grown in Europe yet, but as its name suggests, desert lime. It will actually withstand considerable drought. So in terms of climate change, this may be important. And it has globular, like the citrus caviar citrico here. So this is one of our native species. And then this is the one which you may be familiar with, which is this, which my daughter found in which shop?
Gold Gourmet.
Gold, okay. These ones have some resistance to the disease. Now we don't understand why, because the disease has not reached Australia. So it must be that they have resistance to something else, which also confers resistance to this. But then, of course, you've got to get the genes out. You've got to identify which genes are causing the resistance. You've got to isolate them. Then you have this mechanism for inserting them into the genome of a citrus, another kind of citrus. This will take time. Already we've made hybrids between our native species. I showed some on the screen. This is one which was formed in my garden. I used to run the Royal Botanic Garden in Sydney, and this is one which arose there. But there are many others, not just on the Australian mainland, but also in Australasian region. This is in New Caledonia, and this one has a much, much bigger fruit. This hasn't been brought into cultivation, but it shows some resistance. Typical orange flower. So those are the fruits of it, and you can see that they're about 10 or 12 centimetres long, so they're not little things like this. All right, so one of my Israeli colleagues wrote this last year, and this is trying to reinforce, I'll read it out, trying to reinforce what I've just said. Due to a limited or non-existent seed supply for the most new disease-resistant tolerant stocks, micropropagation will be necessary to produce the millions of trees needed for replant efforts following HLB devastation. The challenges to maintaining a profitable and sustainable worldwide citrus industry have never been greater, and applications of the emerging biotechnologies will play a critical role for any future success. So people have been trying to find whether there are hybrids, whether there's resistance in other places, and whether one can just make straight hybrids without going through genetic engineering. So you may remember at the beginning, Citropsis, the one with the funny big leaf. From Africa, these are crosses between citrus and Citropsis, and these show some resistance. So we may be able to do it a bit more quickly through classical hybridizing techniques. But ultimately, if you think back, remember Citrus reticulata, the mandarin, was linked to all these things. Now I told you that Citrus reticulata, the wild Citrus reticulata, is found only in a few forests in southern China. And not unreasonably, Chinese people don't want you going there and getting them, because those forests have the genetic diversity which Walter Swingle should have been looking for had he known the history of citrus. So they are protected. But what about the others? The pomelo has been almost exterminated from Vietnam. The citron, we're not really certain that there are any wild populations left anywhere. But what about the others? This is one which I had the privilege of naming as a new species. It hadn't got a name. Citrus gracilis, which is from the top end of Australia, the Northern Territory. This shows some resistance, but it's only found in just 2 little groves. So the local people there, the Litchfield Shire Council, were so proud of this, they made it a reserve. So local power. This is the citrus on the left. Here's one of my Chinese colleagues with wild form of kumquat, Citrus japonica, in a forest in southern China. So this is central China. So this is preserved. So some species then are saved. Another of my colleagues from Assam in northeast India, and he is standing next to Citrus indica, which has little fruits like this, but its closest relation is Citrus medica, the citron. So this may help us to broaden the diversity within the citron. So by finding out what is most closely related to these crops, besides their parents and so forth, we may be able to get some resistance. Meanwhile, I would say to you, enjoy your citrus while you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for interesting your presentation, and I think if you like the presentation you should read the book, because there are a lot of more things there, and but the presentation was excellent, and I think I was not lying when I said that it's an extraordinary and a great or perfect combination between botany and culture, humanities. Yeah, it's so great. Thank you very much, David. Bueno, si queréis preguntar algo, estáis a tiempo, es el momento, o comentar o de algo que os haya parecido, mejor en inglés porque el mío no es muy bueno, pero bueno, podemos intentarlo. No sé, ¿alguien se anima?
Do the insects have any sort of natural predators that we could use to...
It's a very good question. Some years ago, the Florida citrus growers, who I advise on this business, got a whole lot of people together, entomologists, bacteriologists, agricultural people of all kinds, besides botanists. And they put us in a big place, and we all had to debate this, and I think they thought that we would come up with the answer. Now, what you've said, biological control, either through predators of the insect or for parasites of the insect, because this has been successful with many other things. All efforts so far have failed. Wish it hadn't.
It's like Elm's disease, do you know?
Dutch elm disease?
Yes,
Yes.
like that.
It is in one sense like that.
Yes.
That's a kind of fungus, not a bacterium, and spread by insects,
Yes.
beetles, and it's an interesting parallel because the elms that used to be in the United Kingdom were all identical. So they were another of these clones. And so once one went down, then they all went down. But what they're doing there I don't know whether you know Britain much, but on the south coast of England, Brighton, the area south of London, they still have elms. And they inject them every year with fungicide. And people have tried that with citruses to inject a bactericidal thing. It works to a certain extent, but it's incredibly expensive. And not all trees respond properly to it. So it's not feasible, unfortunately. People have tried all kinds of things. They've tried putting pads around the trees and heating them to a high temperature, thinking that that might kill the bacteria. Tends to kill the tree, unfortunately. Yes.
Are different qualities between the different citrus around the world?
Different?
Different citrus
Yeah.
around the world. Are there different quality between them?
Different quality.
Quality.
Calidad.
Yeah.
Different qualities of the citruses around the world.
Oh. No, because people want the citrus to be the same. So they grow Valencia oranges, identical all around the world. Or they grow Washington navel oranges all around the world. Within commerce, there's a very, very narrow range, and we have to change that. The same with all of our food. Same with apples and everything else. Everybody wants it to always be the same. So you should always go and buy heirloom tomatoes, ones that are sort of funny shapes and things, and find unusual things like this, and not go for the same stuff everywhere. Yesterday we were looking at Paraguayas, yes, peaches. They're all genetically identical. It's asking for trouble.
Muy bien, pues nada, si les parece vamos a concluir ya la presentación. Darles las gracias. Reconozco que ha superado mis expectativas, por lo que dije al principio. Está la sala llena. There are plenty of people today here, so it's great. Nada, pues desearles un feliz verano y convocarles para la siguiente presentación, ya será en septiembre seguramente. Hacemos el ciclo durante todo el año y es una presentación al mes, así que les invito a que participen en la siguiente y nada, muchas gracias por venir. Gracias, David.
Come and look at these caviar if you haven't seen them.
You sound like you're on audition. Oh, that's fine. No, right. You want to go and inspect? Yes. Okay, yes. Go. Have a squeeze.
So we should buy these to support the importation, should we?
Absolutely,
Yes.
yes.
We'll all go down there and
Yes.
buy it.
Yeah.